I stand here or do I stand here?
You can stand over there.
I said I'd use my GPS to find the right place, but I don't think I trust my GPS. Yeah, Dan was saying, you need directions? I said, no, I'll just plug it into my GPS. And I think by now you all know where my GPS took me, right? The other 15 schools. Well, it's good to be here. I've been talking to Dan, I don't know, a couple of years about the possibility of coming here. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to teach in quite a few of the states, but somehow in that process, I skipped over South Carolina. So when I met him in Memphis and he said South Carolina, my ears perked up and I thought, oh, this is my chance. And here I am. I appreciate the topic that you all have also. I think we all need to be reminded how solid the foundation is for what we believe. My parents and I found the Lord's church very early in my life, and I'm grateful for that. They were of denominational background. One was from a Methodist family, one was from a Baptist family. But some people down the street, I don't even think they were close friends, but they invited us into their home, and they showed us the charts that presented the gospel message. My mother and I were baptized, and a year later my dad was. So I was blessed to find the church early in my life. But I think there is a sense in which I was blessed to find it from the outside. I wasn't reared in the church. I don't know that I had any other family members that were members of the Church of Christ. So I think that has taught me to maybe appreciate the Lord's church more than some people do. And at some point, for the first 18 years of my life, over my career, I worked up in Washington, D.C. I worked for one of the Studies and Analysis Corporations up there. My background is in science. By academic training, I'm a physicist. But it wasn't until the mid-90s that I decided to make the change and become a preacher, a full-time preacher, so I guess I'm kind of a latent-like preacher. But my concern has been, even before I became a preacher, is the wonderful people who sit in our pews, they know what we believe, but they don't necessarily know why. About all the things we believe, about worship, about plan of salvation, my concern is if the people in the pews, if they do not learn how to defend it, they will at some point abandon it. And with that in mind, let me invite you, well, to the rest of the gospel meeting, but especially to Monday night and Tuesday night. Monday night, my lesson is the fundamentals of salvation. I will explain to you in the best logical way that a physicist can why what we believe about salvation is exactly what the Bible teaches. I believe we can defend that easily. Anybody with a good and open heart. On Tuesday night, it's the fundamentals of worship. And I know many congregations still believe, although some have abandoned it, many still believe that we should not use mechanical instruments of music. Well, Tuesday night, I'm going to give you the best logical piecing together of the scriptures I can to try to make it easier for us to explain to other people why it is we don't use mechanical instruments of music. So, I appreciate the opportunities to defend the pillars of the faith. I plan to do that on Monday night and Tuesday night especially. But this morning, it's about the things that we believe about the Bible and about creation, about Christ. I didn't know there was going to be this big old workshop here. You know, you all may have more materials than I'm going to present. I'm going to limit it to the things that I really like best. I think that sometimes when we make our arguments to other people, we scatter a billion things on them. I've limited it just to a few. For this morning, I think if we limit it to a few, maybe we can concentrate on those and maybe we can remember it. When I became a preacher, 25, almost 30 years ago now, it took me a while, I think, to realize it, but it's not how much you tell them that matters. It's how much they remember. And as preachers, I think it's important to remember that sometimes the more we tell them, the less they're going to remember. I was blessed to have as a friend Brother Guy in Woods, who came to the congregation where I was in Virginia many times, held gospel meetings. He had a saying. He said, the mind cannot absorb more than the seat can endure. So we want to say things, we want to say them succinctly enough, the people will be able to remember them. Now, after I say that, I think this lesson this morning of mine is going to be one of the longest ones I present. But I've tried to distill it down to things that are really important. I want to point out in the beginning, God, people use the expression, we just need to take a leap of faith to do this. God never asked us to take a leap of faith. Everything He has asked us to believe, He has given us more than ample reason to believe it. Romans 12:1, we are supposed to be living sacrifice, holy, acceptable God, which is your reasonable service. King James, New King James, other versions have various words there. The Greek word there for reasonable in that verse is actually the Greek word logikos, which means logical. I saw one of the books you have on your table out here. It says, our doctrine is logical. It is. Some would say rational. There are good reasons to believe what we believe. And as we grow up, as you young people grow up in school or among your friends, you're going to find more and more people that say, oh, no, I don't believe that. No, that doesn't make any sense. Yes, it does. If they don't believe just like you do, it's because they haven't spent the time studying it like you have. Our faith is a rational faith. It's based on facts that are accurate, they're verifiable, they're defensible. And I want to talk about just a few of those today. I like to think about, all of my graphics did not come through. There was supposed to be a three-legged stool there. Our rational faith is based on three solid pillars. One is what we know about Jesus. The second is what we can see in creation. And the third is what we can understand about the Bible. Our rational faith is built on three solid pillars. I want to talk about each one of those pillars. And then at the end, I want to show you how those pillars reinforce one another. So the first pillar is Jesus. We have a lot of details about Jesus in the Bible. I have listed just a few of these here, and you'll see the purpose of that in a minute. He was known as the King of the Jews. He was the founder of Christianity. He was crucified in Jerusalem by the Romans, but with a great influence of the Jews. Now, we know those things are found in our Bible. What I want to remind you today, or tell you if you haven't heard it before, those same facts are found in secular history. We tell people about Jesus and they say, oh, well, of course you believe that. That's what you're getting out of your book. Like the Bible is our book. It's not just our Bible that has these bits of information. I want to tell you about 3 or 4 documents of history that talk about some of the attributes that are listed here. For example, not long after Christ was on this earth, people were talking about him. Some of the historians were writing about him. Some of the Roman rulers were writing about him. This was a private letter that they found about AD 74. Jesus was probably born, as the calendar has been adjusted, probably about 5 years before Christ. I believe he died about AD 30. This was less than a generation after Jesus had come and lived and taught and died. This man, Mara ben Serapion, wrote a letter to his son. And the point that he's making in the letter, I'm not sure it's a valid point, but the point that he's making is people who kill wise men. Bad things happen to people who kill wise men. And he wrote about Socrates, the Athenians killed. He wrote about Pythagoras. He wrote about wise men that had been killed by people and how their lives turned into a disaster. He gave those 2 well-known examples from history, Socrates and Pythagoras, but he used a third example. He used Jesus. He says, what happened to the Jews after they executed their wise king? He says it was just after that their kingdom was abolished. Of course, Jesus was crucified about AD 30, AD 70. The great destruction, the Roman army came into Jerusalem and literally just flattened it. So what he's saying is he had 2 really good examples to make the point to his son that bad things happen to those who killed wise men. He had Socrates, he had Pythagoras. He had no reason to add a third person unless it was well understood, well accepted in history. When you have 2 examples, you don't dilute your argument by adding a third bad example. So it must have been that at the time it was well known about Jesus. And he says the Jews executed their wise king. Notice here he's attributing the death of Jesus to the influence of the Jews. Private letter documents some of the things we believe because they're written in our Bible. The Roman ruler, Pliny, he wrote a lot of details about Christianity. He had been killing the Christians. And he was writing to the emperor, says, I've killed so many of these people, should I really keep on killing them? And he wrote about the Christians. He said, they affirmed, however, that the whole of their guilt or their error was that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day, which we would know would be Sunday, the first day of the week, before it was light, and they sang in alternate verse a hymn to Christ as to a God. So when he's writing the Roman emperor, and these are writings that come out of the official Roman records. Somebody's not making this stuff up. He documents the fact that the Christians had a habit of meeting and that they believed in Christ and they worshiped Christ as a God. So here, from the Roman records, if you will, we have a documentation outside the Bible of many of the things that we believe. There was a man named Lucian, and he wrote about Christianity. He wasn't a Christian. He was opposed to Christianity. He wrote scornfully about Christ. He wrote scornfully about Christians. But he wrote. And what did he write? He referred to Christ as the man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Well, we know Christianity is not a cult. It's the one true religion. But he wrote about Christianity, and he talks about Christ as crucified in Palestine. Here are some of the important elements of our faith, found not just in the Bible. They are found in... He wrote about Emperor Nero. You know, Rome burned, and some think that Nero, the emperor, was the guy who set the fire. Well, he was trying to deflect guilt from himself, so he was blaming it on the Christians. And so he wrote something about the Christians. And he said, Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. What does he say? He names Christ by name, Christ, Christus, as the founder of Christianity. He said he was put to death by Pontius Pilate, which we know from our Bible is absolutely correct. So look at all of these key elements of what we believe found in the documents of the day, not just in the Bible. So what have we found? I just took three. I gave you 4 examples. These are 3 of them. By the way, I do have some of these printed out if you want a copy of this later, okay? And you're saying, why didn't he pass it out to me again? I found it, okay? If you put all of this together, one guy talks about the Jews executing their king. One talks about Christus, the founder of the religion, being put to death by Pontius Pilate. And Lucian talks about he was crucified in Palestine. If you put just those 3 elements together, what do you have? You have Jesus was what? The wise king of the Jews who founded Christianity, was crucified in Palestine by Pontius Pilate because of the influence of the Jews. The list of things that I gave you, the essence of what we believe out of the Bible, that's a lot of it right there. So if anybody ever says, well, of course you believe those things, those are written in your book, say, not just in my book. They are written in the history books of the era. They are written in the Roman records of the era. They're even recorded in private letters of that era. It's not just our book. Jesus is a historical fact. One of the commentators, F.F. Bruce, said, you know, some people want to say that Jesus was just a myth. People just made up about him. He really wasn't there. Just a made up, just one of those things the Bible has that's just not right. Ruth points out that some writers, notice he uses the word writers, may toy with the fancy of a Christ myth, but they do not do so on grounds of historical evidence. The historicity of Jesus, that is, the historical fact of Jesus, is as axiomatic, he uses big words. The historical fact of Jesus is as true as an unbiased historian as the historical fact of Julius Caesar. We believe in other people of that era that we've never seen. Well, the evidence for Jesus is just as strong. He says it's not historians who propagate the Christ myth theory. It's not the historians that do it. And something I'm going to point out later throughout several of these. The psalmist says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. People may have motivations, selfish motivations, for trying to claim that Christianity is not true. That's a heart problem that they've got. And the psalmist correctly says he said it in his heart. His head knows better. If his head looks at the objective evidence that's there, the objective evidence shows that what we believe is true. The ones who doubt it are the ones who do not want to believe it. They are the ones with a heart problem. So pillar number one of our faith is Jesus. He was, he is the Christ, the promised Messiah. The last part of John, in John 8:34, Jesus says, unless you believe I am he, you'll die in your sins. Well, he who? Who is it that we're supposed to believe that Jesus is? John 8:34, Jesus says, unless you believe that I am he. If you want to know who he is, you just read down almost the last chapter of the book of John. John says, and truly, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written. Why did John write the Gospel of John? These are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. An important thing that's stressed in the New Testament, and I think more than we stress it today, the identity of Jesus. That man, that baby that was born was given the name Jesus. He was born in Bethlehem. He was reared in Nazareth. He was crucified in Jerusalem. Who was that man? John tells us. He was the Christ. He was the Son of God. And the word Christ, I think many people say Jesus Christ, like it's a first name and last name. It's not. It's an identity. Jesus is the Christ. John 1:41, when they had found Christ, they said, I found the Messiah, which being translated is the Christ. You see, in Hebrew, there is a word for the anointed one, God. That word is Messias, from which we get Messiah in our Old Testament. In the New Testament, of course, was written in Greek, where there's also a word in Greek that means anointed one. That word is Christos. When I say that Jesus is the Christ, I'm saying I believe he is that promised Messiah. How important is that? Many people have claimed to be that Messiah. The Bible tells us who it was. It was that man, Jesus. He was the promised Messiah. And the name Christ, that we so often see referred to in the New Testament, that word Christ is the vocabulary equivalent of the word Messias or Messiah in the Old Testament. Pillar number one of our faith is Jesus. He is the Christ. He is the Son of God. By the way, when people were baptized, if you look at the case in Acts chapter 8, you know, the man in the chariot says, what's keeping me from being baptized? And the preacher said to him, if you believe with all your heart, you may. What did he say? He didn't say, I accept Jesus as my personal Savior. He said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. In the New Testament, the confession before baptism was the identity of Jesus. He's the Christ. He is the Son of God. So, pillar number one is Jesus. Pillar number two is creation. And since my background is in science, creation is very fascinating to me for sure. Many times we look at Romans chapter 1, and well, we should. The inspired Apostle Paul says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. God shows his presence and his power in a lot of ways, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood that the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Without excuse. That's strong language. Not my language, language of the Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul says, anybody who looks at the creation and does not conclude that there is a creator is without excuse. Why? because everything can be clearly seen. God has left his calling card in the wide expanse of the creation, in the universe. And every year or two, it seems like they learn more about the universe. The universe is nothing less than amazing. It's impressive. Its size is enormous, held together by an invisible force we call gravity. Of course, the most amazing thing about it is the complexity of life. And they just can't figure that out. They love to be able to figure it out so they can say, I can explain it so I don't have to believe in creation. But they can't, so they have to believe in creation. The universe is really, really big. There's a passage in the Old Testament that says the stars cannot be counted. Now, God can count them. God has them all named. Wrap your mind around that. But it says the stars cannot be counted. I did the math. I made an estimate of the number of people that have ever lived on this earth. And I assumed that every person that ever lived from the instant they were born began counting stars. And they counted one star a second for their whole life. And if you add up all the people spending all their lives counting stars, they can't. There's not enough time. There are more stars than that. The Bible statement, maybe we think it's figurative, the stars can't be counted. It's literally true. I did the math. Now, for years, the scientists, I don't think bullying is the wrong word. They tried to bully us into believing that matter and life itself wasn't created. It resulted really from this great series of accidents. The accidents, you know, there was dead matter. Dead matter that came from somewhere, you know, they have never really explained where it came from, have they? But it was there, it was dead, and over, you know, millions, if not billions of years, accidents happen. Funny things happen in that matter. Accidents happen that have changes of form, and if you wait long enough, then you get mad. In other words, I came from dead matter. I can think, I can move, I can breathe, but I came from dead matter. The scientists tried to bully us into believing that. And the theory they called evolution. They believed that from the dead things that existed over eons of time, that evolved into what we are today. What was interesting is this little point right here. Many scientists have been changing their views in my lifetime. And I realize my lifetime is a lot longer than most of your lifetimes. But in my lifetime, they have changed. Some of those who were the biggest advocates of evolution have denied evolution now. I want to give you just 2 or 3 examples. You can find many more. There's a big book that was published several years ago. The title of the book was That Their Words May Be Used Against Them. And it was a bunch of quotes from people who had been evolutionists. And now they were criticizing evolution. Let me just give you some samples from the book. One was Dr. Lipson, a famous British physicist and evolutionist, says, to my mind, the theory does not stand up at all. Here he's been defending this and preaching this and proclaiming it. His career was based on it. Some of these people, it was like one morning they woke up and they said, wow, this really doesn't make sense, does it? He says, it does not stand up at all, the evolutionary theory. He says, I think, however, we must go further than this and admit that the only explanation is creation. He says, I know this is anathema, bad stuff, to physicists, as indeed it is to me. But we must not reject a theory that we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. He's saying evolutionary theory is not logical. The pieces don't fit together. And I will give you my prediction as a physicist. I believe that 150 years from now, you can write this in your will for your grandchildren. 150 years from now, people will laugh at the theory of evolution just like they laugh at the flat earth theory. Many years ago, people, oh yeah, the earth is flat, we believe the earth is flat. Well, we think that's laughable today. I'm telling you that the theory of evolution is as illogical as the flat earth theory. And I believe that within 150 years from now, of course, I think I've been saying that for about 20 years, so maybe I need to adjust that. But it's going to be laughable. It does not hold together. And that's what this physicist said. The theory does not stand up at all. Now, if you're not going to believe in evolution, what are you going to believe in? I want to suggest to you, I probably should have put this on a slide, there are only two choices. In events that occur in life, there are two choices. They're either random or they're not random. They're either random or not random. And for an event to be not random, it has got to have something causing it. It's got to be on purpose. If it's not an accident, it's got to be on purpose. It's got to be purposeful. And what he says is, if I deny the fact that a group of random events can produce the result of evolution, I've only got one choice. I've got to believe in creation. It was caused by some intellectual entity. Now, I think we have to be a little careful. Just because they say, oh, it's got to be some outside entity that does it, that doesn't mean they're necessarily believing in the God of the Bible. But they're recognizing that random events can't produce the effect. So they're saying there should be some cause. There should, if they're not done accidentally, they're done purposely. If they're done purposefully, there's got to be a purposer. He says, I know this is an aspect of physicists, as it is to me. If we must not reject the theory if we do not like. Liking. Liking is things of the heart, isn't it? He's saying, those whose heart like this have to be careful. Experimental evidence does not support it. In other words, they shouldn't let their heart be liking stuff that their head knows is wrong. But that's what these people did for much of their career. That was Dr. Lipson, Dr. Dennis Gabor, a Nobel Prize winner, said, I cannot believe that everything developed by random mutation. It just couldn't have been a bunch of accidents. If it couldn't have been a bunch of accidents, there must have been something purposeful that happened there. Crowley, a zoologist, says the explanatory doctrines of biological evolution do not stand up to an objective, in-depth criticism. These guys have been preaching this stuff for years, and all of a sudden they're willing to be honest with us and say, well, you know, I never really thought it made sense. They prove to be either in conflict with reality or else incapable of solving the major problems involved. It just doesn't work. 150 years. Counting. Okay. And there's one more, and I particularly like this one. There was a time that two of these people teamed up. One was an atheist. An atheist is a person who says, there is no God. The other was an agnostic. An agnostic is a person that says, yeah, I don't really know. Gnosticism is knowledge. Gnosticism means I don't know. So we got these two people, famous mathematicians and scientists, teamed up to study the origins of life. Looks like a good thing, right? What did they conclude? They concluded the probability of life originating at random, by accident, at random is so utterly minuscule, it is so small as to make it absurd. He's saying it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous to think that all of this came forth from those dead elements, like so many people believe, like these people believed for many years. The probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make it absurd. Then he says it becomes sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics on which life depends are in every respect deliberate. Deliberate. What does that mean? Somebody did it on purpose, right? It was deliberate. What they're saying is it can't have happened all by accident, so it must have happened on purpose. There must have been a purposer. Now, this was kind of earth-shattering news back then. These are two people, their careers were built on evolution. So when they reached their conclusions, there was an article that came out in the London Daily Express, and the headline of the article was, two skeptical scientists put their heads together and reached an amazing conclusion, there must be a God. You see, it's true in science, and it's also true in religion. People can talk and talk and talk and talk, but when it comes to the point that their academic reputation is based on it, they're going to quit trying to fool us. They're going to tell us things that are true. That's why if you look back at the commentaries in the 1800s, Adam Clark, some of those Methodist Presbyterian commentators, they teach exactly the same thing we do. Why? They knew their Bibles. And they valued their academic reputation more than they did their religious denomination. So when it came down to it, when their reputation was on the line, they were going to tell the truth. Same thing here. The theory is so obvious that, oh, he says there must be a God. Such as